Thank you very much. It was an amazing way to start this sort of flagship event for this collaboration between PRISA, the Policy Research Institute for South Asia, and the work that we're doing here at Brunel University with the Brunel, it's the South Asia Studies Research Group of Brunel, where I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But thank you so much for joining us today. And it's my honour and privilege to introduce this speaker and to start this event, especially joining us for this important question: can South Asian Muslims succeed in the UK today? But firstly, I should say a little bit about myself. I'm Luke Heslop. I'm an anthropologist here in the Department of Social and Political Sciences, and I am one of the directors with Jisen and Hurry of PRISA, the think tank. And I have lived and worked in South Asia for quite some time, as well as doing the policy research things. And the Brunel South Asia Research Group, I co-host a podcast with Professor James Staples over there called The Migration Menu, in which we kind of do a lot of work out in the community, in the diaspora communities around West London, from sort of Hounslow to Harrow. Now, a quick overview of the research centre at Brunel. We have quite a unique set of academics and scholars working in various parts of this university, whether it's in STEM, whether it's in social and political sciences, whether it's in arts and humanities. And what the research group has tried to do is centralise all of this expertise knowledge and focus it around the theme of South Asia, and whether it's to do with health outcomes, education outcomes, nutrition or entrepreneurship and business. We try to direct our skill set towards the needs of the community in an attempt to kind of open the university up to its immediate surroundings in a way that feels quite novel and exciting. So we've built this collaboration with PRISA, who work closely with policy actors and researchers and within the region and its diasporas to talk about migration, politics, urban change and social transformation, and this kind of cultural dynamics of everyday life, which makes Brunel situated where it is a sort of, they call it the beacon on the hill in this part of London. It makes Brunel very well placed for us to use our lecture theatres, use our facilities, use the campus as a kind of, not just as a centre for excellence and research, but a place where we can bring communities together to have important conversations such as this one. So, this is a question that's deeply layered and urgent. It speaks to long histories of exclusion and racialization. And we want to shift that conversation to talk about the kind of hope and the creative possibilities that are etched against some structural inequalities carved out of the late 20th century. For young Muslim men in particular, dominant stories are too often framed negatively. So we urgently want to hear more positive stories, and that's what I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. And we're incredibly lucky to be joined this evening by Mohammed Amin, whose work has opened up some of these really crucial conversations about identity, success and representation, and particularly within British Muslim communities. So Mohammed Amin, if I've got the Wikipedia right, has been listed as one of the 100 most influential Muslims in the UK. And in this talk, we're going to hear a little bit about, I believe, Amin's personal journey and successful journey into business as well, with Price Waterhouse UK and working in Islamic finance. So he's a very distinguished guest, and we're very lucky to have him kicking off this first talk of the series. So without further ado, I'll hand over and say thank you very much. If we just give an applause to our speaker.
Yes. Good afternoon. I've known Zishan Hashim for less than a year, but we've already had some stimulating conversations. I was trying to choose the word very carefully because on some issues we have disagreed so strongly that we've simply had to agree to disagree. What I'm thinking about is the question which we were discussing when I was looking through a paper that he sent me, a paper by somebody else, and whether politicians engage in political activity for their own interests or for other sort of social welfare interests that they wish to advance. And we simply could not agree on that point at all. So today, the subject of the talk emerged from a long Zoom conversation that we had, because he wanted me to speak here, but we needed to think about what was I going to talk about. And eventually we converged on this question. So this is what I'm going to cover. I've got a short version of the talk. I then got some data, not a lot of data, but I have some data. And what I'm really most interested in talking about is what determines success. Why do some people succeed and not others? And this is something I've thought a great deal about personally. I'm now 74 years old, so I've had a long perspective. And I talk regularly to schools for a charity called Speakers for Schools. And that's one of the questions that in more than about 3/4 of my talks, I ask the pupils to think about while I'm speaking, because I tell them my views on how they can succeed in life, but I want them to think about what success means. Why do some people succeed and not others? And then the most important and most worthwhile part of the afternoon will be the Q&A and discussion, when you can challenge me on anything I've said, you can ask me about what I talked about, or you can ask me about anything else you want to talk about. No questions are off limits. I can't guarantee to answer every question, but nothing's off limits. So, the short version of my talk. Question: can South Asian Muslims succeed in the UK? And the operative word in this question is actually can. That's the most important word. And my degree's in mathematics, and I'm not very good at the sort of linear algebra that we used to study, but the fundamental basics of logic are still there. The opposite of this proposition would be South Asian Muslims can't succeed in Britain. And therefore, to prove that they can, I only need one example. Don't even need two examples. One will suffice. So here is my example. Saranwar Pervez migrated to the UK from South Asia in 1956. I think from Pakistan by then, although I can't guarantee, but most of his business interests are Pakistan related, so I'm pretty sure it's Pakistan. And he went into business, and by 2020 he was worth 3.1 billion. I can't remember if he's been put into the House of Lords, but he's certainly been knighted. Does anybody think that this person is not a success? Nobody. So, case closed, that's the end of the lecture. South Asian Muslims can succeed in the UK. No, I'm quite serious. That actually proves the point. I'm not putting myself in the same class as Saranwar Pervez. For a start, he's about 1,000 times richer than I am. But I was born in Pakistan back in 1950. I came to the UK in 1952, aged less than 2. My parents were illiterate and extremely poor. I did a degree in maths from Cambridge, became a chartered accountant, and in 1990, I became the second ethnic minority person and the first Muslim to become a partner in Price Waterhouse in the UK. Later on, I was elected in 2003 to the firm's supervisory board. That's a board of 15 partners that basically keeps an eye on the top management, a bit like a non-executive board of directors for a public company. 2016, I was really pleased to get an MBE for services to community cohesion and interfaith relations, because I'm one of my many voluntary roles is I'm the co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester. The most important thing on this page is actually my website, mohammedamin.com. When I retired, I taught myself how to build a website at the age of 59, and it's got over 800 pages, and there's a whole section of the website with the title Success Tips, where I put on lots of thoughts of mine on how to succeed in life, from really important things to pretty trivial things. For example, how to tie your shoelaces. Quite serious. I didn't realize until about 2 years ago that all my life I've been tying my shoelaces wrong. And I watched a video on YouTube. I can't remember how I came to this video. It must have been via Twitter or something. And since then, I started tying my shoelaces differently, and now they never come undone. So I decided to share that on my website. Saves you a few minutes, might save you from getting a broken neck. So, some data. Data is the least interesting thing from my point of view, because you can all go out and find it for yourselves, either by doing your own searching or by using tools that will search for you. And in fact, one of the changes I made to my own life this year, I don't make many New Year's resolutions, but my New Year's resolution this year was to make more use of AI. And I decided if I was going to use it, I should actually start paying for it. So I have signed up to pay, I think it's $20 a month for perplexity.ai. And the great thing about that, unlike other AI tools, is that when you do a search, when you ask it a question, it always gives you the sources that it's consulted. So you can find endless amounts of data by using a tool like that. But I've got a little bit which I would like to share with you. I get fed up when I talk to younger Asians when they say how terrible racial and religious discrimination in this country is, and agree it's terrible, and that it's getting worse, because that is simply incorrect. There have been social studies going on for decades where they ask people the same question all the time and track the results. Now, this chart is not a longitudinal chart. This is a different graph, but it's based upon the same kind of data. And the thing that I've cited, I mean, the slides will be readily available to everybody. They can be emailed to you if you ask for them afterwards. But what caught my eye about this graph was this is a graph based upon people's attitudes as measured in 2013, but classified by when they were born. So that these are views of people who in 2013 were quite old. They were born before 1940, and these are people who were very young. And several things catch your eye when you look at that. First of all, people are much more tolerant if they are younger, more recently born, than if they're older. And this replacement of old people by young people is a big factor in the long-term decline of racial prejudice. Some people may change their attitudes and become more tolerant as they get older, but a big part of it is that the intolerant ones just keep dying out while more tolerant younger people are being born. The other thing that is striking about this graph is how much higher the green line is. That's dislike of Muslims, people who would reject if a close relative wanted to marry a Muslim, compared to other things like disliking black African people or disliking Asians or East Europeans. The reality about life in Britain is that until about 1988 or 89, no white person in this country really cared that I was a Muslim. It was just an utter irrelevancy to them. If they didn't like me, it was because I was brown-skinned and of Pakistani or South Indian origin, rather than, as I said, it was irrelevant to them that I was a Muslim. What changed was Muslims behaving badly. Initially, with the Salman Rushdie affair, marches in places like Bradford, burning books on the street. That's when I became Muslim in the eyes of white people. Before that, it was utterly irrelevant. And of course, since then, we've had things like 9/11, the London bombings, ISIS, with so many examples of deplorable Muslim behavior around the world. It is no surprise to me, anyway, that many people are prejudiced against Muslims. Prejudice is entirely wrong. The actions of ISIS are nothing to do with actions of me, but this is real life and human nature. That is the only actual real data that I'm going to present. I've got some anecdata for you. And this is something that I particularly focus on because I've done a talk on several occasions, which you can find on my website in the videos section, about how Britain has changed in my lifetime. I did it initially for one school in Macclesfield, and then I had to repeat it on a few occasions. And I do look at quite a lot of data in that. And one of the things I'm really interested in is how education has changed in this country. So when I was a teenager going to university, I went in 1969, but the data I got is from 1970. A tiny proportion, 8.4% of my age group would go on to university. Now, by the way, that percentage is about 50% for the national age group. But what is really striking is that I grew up in Manchester with a group of randomly selected Pakistani origin Muslims. The only selection that they had was that our parents knew each other and we all lived in the same slum in Manchester. And about half of those people, even though most of them were very poor, although some were actually even then quite rich, because my best friend, his father was the richest Pakistani in Manchester, while mine was dead poor. About half of them went on to university, which I thought was really striking and worth sharing, because immigrants tend to be much more aspirational than the natives. So now on to the most interesting thing about this talk, certainly from my perspective, and the most useful thing, I think, from your perspective. Because, as I said, after 74 years of life, I think I understand a lot better what actually contributes to people succeeding in life, in business, in careers, and why people fail. Because I've seen below me, much younger people, you hire somebody from university, first-class honours degree in mathematics, really bright, really promising, and then their career tails away, while other people go on to be very successful. What's different between them? I'm really old-fashioned. This is the title of a page on my website, and that's the URL. I wrote that page after I'd done a talk in Manchester at the British Muslim Heritage Centre about Islamic finance. Big audience, a couple of hundred people, and afterwards is when you do talks, people come up to you and talk to you. And one of the young guys was asking me a question. We chatted for a few minutes. Then I asked him, "Do you mind if I ask you a personal question?" He said, "No, carry on." "Were you born in this country?" "Yes, I was." "Why do you speak English with an Asian accent?" And he was floored. He wasn't floored because he didn't have an answer to the question why. He was floored because he didn't even know that he spoke English with an Asian accent. None of his teachers at school had ever said anything to him. It's politically incorrect. His friends were all Asians, and so he was utterly unaware of it. And the brutal reality is that no matter how unfair it may seem, other people assess you and judge you all the time in life. And frankly, if you speak English with an Asian accent, using exactly the same words that, say, I might use, people will think that you're less intelligent, just because your accent is Asian. It also applies to white people. If you're white and you speak Scouse, that's the accent from Liverpool, people look down on you. And it may be unfair, but it's the real world. When I went to university, I didn't know it, but I had a very strong Manchester Mancunian accent. All my friends noticed it straight away as soon as I started talking. Somewhere in the 3 years I spent at Cambridge, because I was hanging around with lots of other people who were not from Manchester, I just lost my accent. I have a sort of ear, I think it comes from growing up bilingual. I spoke Punjabi at home with my parents. At school I spoke English. And so I'm just more attuned to accents and the way that people speak. And whenever I spend time with anybody, I start talking like them. So it really is worth thinking about. And not just spoken English, but also written English. I've worked quite closely with highly educated people of, for example, Pakistani origin, who I'm not going to name. And they've got doctorates, and they can write really high quality papers in economics, but they regularly make mistakes choosing between the words "a" and the word "the" when they're writing their English. Because that's the kind of thing that is hardest to learn and get right if you're not a native English speaker. But it really does make a difference in how people receive what you write. And it's really worth putting in the effort to change that. The spoken English is actually quite easy. You spend lots and lots of time listening to BBC Radio 4. The more you listen to BBC Radio 4, the more you will speak like BBC Radio 4. And frankly, you will succeed more in life if you speak like BBC Radio 4 than if you don't. Written English, just read lots and lots of high quality written English. Literature, for example. The next one is a bit of human psychology. People behave, on average, the way that you expect them to behave. If you assume that random strangers can be trusted, occasionally you'll be disappointed, but most of the time they will prove themselves to be trustworthy. If you think that people are untrustworthy, they will behave in untrustworthy ways. It's really peculiar. I think it's something about the vibes that we send out when we have attitudes in ourselves and other people sense them and they behave accordingly. And if you expect people to be hostile to you, for example, if you're going for a job interview, if you expect to be discriminated against, being honest about it, you will be discriminated against. I never suffered from that, partly because I was such a small minority. In my secondary school, for example, we had about 150-year group entry every year group, 5 forms of 30 people each. And each year there'd be 1 or 2 ethnic minority people and everybody else would be white. So you just got used to living in an all-white environment. It's actually harder for young people today because they've got larger Asian sort of peer groups. So I was never conscious in that sense of being different. Similarly, when I applied to Cambridge, because I really wanted to study theoretical physics, mathematics at Cambridge, the one thing that never occurred to me to even ask myself is, will they not let me in because I am brown? Never thought about it. Your level of preparation and readiness and the exam itself. In that sense, I found it harder than papers I was doing as degree exams. Obviously, the academic level was higher at the degree exams, but so was your preparation. So I arrived for the interview, and I only saw one other candidate that day. He was white, he was from a public school, and I'm pretty sure he didn't get a place. I can't guarantee it, but 9 months later, when we turned up, the new 100 sort of undergraduates at Clare College, which is the college I went to, I wouldn't have recognized him necessarily, but I can guarantee he would have recognized me because there were so few brown faces there around. So Clare College chose to give me a place rather than him. I have no reason to believe that they would ever want to discriminate. And I got really annoyed with our former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, when he kicked up a massive fuss, about 20 years ago now, when some white working class girl was denied a place at Oxford, even though she had lots of A's at A-level, because he felt Oxford was discriminating against sort of working class people, when the reality is that everybody that applies to Oxford has just as good A-levels. And from knowing Clare College inside out, not just when I was an undergraduate, because I'm on the alumni council, I regularly meet the college's master, etc. I've had presentations about how keen Clare is to encourage applications from disadvantaged pupils. They bend over backwards to take people from diverse ethnic minority backgrounds. But I can understand the psychology. I mean, one of the really weird experiences I had was when I was 63. At that stage, I was retired. I was a member of the Carlton Club, which is a posh club on St James's Street in London, associated with the Conservative Party. And I joined a Conservative dining club called the 1900 Club, and black tie dinners. Well, that's okay, I've got a dinner jacket. And the very first 1900 Club dinner I walked into, when you're having the initial sort of drinks before you sit down, I didn't know anybody there at all. And you do feel very strange at first. Then you walk up, you find somebody that you talk to, a complete stranger, and you get a conversation going. So I can understand how people, if they come from an ethnic minority background, feel uncomfortable in strange or white environments, but you just have to get over it. This one is based again on my real life experience at Price Waterhouse Coopers and in the 2000s. So we had, when I first started at PwC, Price Waterhouse in 1987, that we had very, 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 very few ethnic minority people. We had 25 people in the Manchester tax department. I might have been the only ethnic minority person in the tax department. I joined as a senior manager from outside. But by then, we had quite a few. And in particular, I remember one of our members of staff who was a Muslim hijabi. And whenever you saw her, she had her head down, she was working. She never, ever went to any of the events, never went to any socials. And when it came round to doing pay rises, as a partner, the partners sit down in a meeting and go through all members of staff, their evaluations, promotions, pay rises, etc. And there were a number of ethnic minority people at that time. And individually, every decision we made about whether they were white or brown, I agreed with. When I looked at the decisions afterwards in the round, the ethnic minority people had got smaller pay rises and fewer promotions, even though I agreed with every single individual decision. And I talked about it with the partner in charge of the tax department afterwards, and we agreed. It was weird. It wasn't that the firm was choosing to discriminate. I was sitting there in the confidential discussions, person by person. And at that time, I was on the supervisory board, and we even had discussions about it at the supervisory board, because we started improving our data gathering nationally. I had a role in getting PwC to improve its data gathering for individual staff in terms of ethnic profiling and so on. And the great thing about data is it tells you things. PwC could prove, without doubt, that we were equal opportunity recruiters. If you applied to join PwC, we had data to show that you were just as likely to get in, regardless of your ethnic background, provided you had equal levels of qualifications and experience. Initially, our data on our own staff was terrible because a lot of the staff had been there a long time before data gathering started. So we used to be in this stupid situation where newspapers like Accountancy Age would contact all the big accounting firms saying, how many ethnic minority partners have you got? And we would have to say, we have none, even though we had loads of them, because we couldn't prove, who was who. So we decided to get really serious about internal data gathering. So we put a self-profiling questionnaire in front of our annual selection of the flexible benefits package. So every member of staff and every partner had to confront the questionnaire once a year. And our data went from being hopeless to being perfect overnight, or over a couple of years. Once we had good data, we knew at a national level that if you were an ethnic minority in PwC nationally, you were going to get promoted more slowly and leave more quickly. That's the bad news. The good news is that at least we knew about it as top management, and we were able to do something about it, and we were starting to do something about it by the time that I left. But I was really pleased about 2-3 years ago now, reading the firm's annual report, to find that PwC no longer has an ethnic minority pay gap. Ethnic minorities at PwC now are as senior and paid as highly as white people. And the same is true for partners as well. But it's really important to socialize, and there's a whole page on my website about the importance of attending work-related social events. Because if people don't know who you are, they're not going to work with you as effectively. And if they don't work with you as effectively, your career will suffer. It's as simple as that. The other thing I've been thinking about over the years is, what does it mean to be good at your job? Without wanting to sound boastful, I had very strong technical skills. When I was a newly qualified tax person at Arthur Andersen, I was really, really good at solving tax problems. I was brilliant at it. I was hopeless at talking to clients. I was hopeless at trying to do man management. I just didn't have those kinds of skills. My background was such that I hadn't gained it. And as the years go by, you have to learn the hard way. Because the more senior you get, the more other skills start to matter. Technical skills never go away. That's why there's still some blue up there at the top. But it's the other skills that start to matter more and more. And some of them are innate, some of them you gain by thinking about it, by practice, by study, by learning, by going on courses, but they really, really matter. And they can be very peculiar skills as well sometimes. So, do you need high levels of knowledge of British history or Shakespeare or the Bible to be a tax partner? You would assume not. But if you're going to have dinner with your client, the one thing your client does not want to talk about over dinner is international tax involving his company. He wants to talk about other things. In my 23 years at Price Waterhouse UK, for most of that time, my most important client was an American multinational, the UK part of that American multinational. And the UK was sufficiently important to this American multinational that the worldwide head of tax was regularly in the UK. And the worldwide head of tax was somebody who was a tax lawyer, and he was a Reform Jew, or a liberal Jew, I think one of those two. And we used to have fascinating conversations over dinner about everything under the sun, nothing to do with tax, but my ability to have those conversations was critically dependent on my knowledge of things like this. And again, I have a really concrete piece of advice. There's a magazine that I discovered when I was an undergraduate at Clare College, Cambridge, in 69 to 72, called the New York Review of Books. And on and off for the rest of my life, I have subscribed to it. I've had gaps when I'm not subscribed because you get behind, and I'm presently about a year behind with my copies. But it's the most amazing magazine because it reviews books, but it reviews books of all kinds. So the range and variety of books where I've read book reviews, and sometimes even went and bought the book, is just amazing. It's a concrete piece of advice. If you ask me, how can I broaden myself? It's no good me telling you, start at page 1 of Shakespeare and keep reading until you get to the end. It doesn't work like that. But it is actually viable to subscribe to a magazine like this and read it regularly. So that's all I wanted to say.